Who's better, Jokic or Embiid? With the start of the 2021 NBA playoffs, the race for the league's MVP is on. Though players like LeBron James and Chris Paul have had spectacular seasons and are more than worthy considerations for the award, most conversations end with one of two names: Nikola Jokic or Joel Embiid. The funny thing about these two players is that they actually draw an unusually large amount of similarities. They each play the center position, were drafted in 2014, were born outside North America, and are bona fide leaders for their respective teams. The NBA feels like the 90s again, with the two big hulking men at the forefront of MVP conversations. It's unique to find not just one, but two centers at the top of the MVP rankings, especially considering that the NBA has been ruled by guards and forwards for years. In fact, the last time a center hoisted an MVP trophy was over 20 years ago, when Shaq and his Lakers ran through the NBA in the 1999-2000 season. So whether you feel this award belongs to Joel Embiid or Nikola Jokic, history will be made this season. Regardless of who brings home the hardware in 2021, does this really mean that one player is better than the other? We've broken down each player's game with the hopes of deciding once and for all which of these two dominant big men is currently better and who has a higher ceiling. More precisely, we're able to make our decisions by analysing their style of play via their playmaking ability, shooting, defence, athleticism and longevity. Playmaking. Both Embiid and Jokic carry incredibly diverse skill sets, with their most notable traits being each player's unique playmaking ability. Simply looking at their stats this season, you don't have to look far to see the differences in their game. Joel Embiid is averaging 29.2 points per game, 10.7 rebounds per game, 2.9 assists per game, 1.4 blocks per game, 1 steal per game, 3.1 turnovers per game, shooting 51.6% from the field, 37.7% from 3, and 86% from the line. He's also extremely efficient with an overall plus-minus of plus 8.4 in just 49 games played on 31.4 minutes per game in 2021. Nikola Jokic is averaging 26.4 points per game, 10.8 rebounds per game, 8.5 assists per game, 0.7 blocks per game, 1.4 steals per game, 3.2 turnovers per game, shooting 56.6% from the field, 40.2% from 3, and 86.3% from the line. Jokic is incredibly efficient with an overall plus-minus of 5.3 in 68 games played on 35 minutes per game in 2021, as well as an overall PER of 31.31. Looking at the basic stats, Jokic is obviously superior in terms of assists per game, but he's also one of the best playmakers in the entire NBA regardless of position. He's the primary ball handler for Denver and showcases a unique level of passing ability and vision that are rare to find in any player, let alone a traditional center. The fact that Jokic averages a ridiculous 8.5 assists per game, which is 6th in the NBA, with only 3.2 turnovers per game, is extremely impressive, with an assist-to-turnover ratio of 2.67. Especially in comparison to Embiid's numbers: 2.9 assists per game, 3.1 turnovers per game, and an assist-to-turnover ratio of 0.94. At the end of the day, Embiid's not relied on to be the primary initiator on offense like Jokic is, which is part of the reason why we see such a discrepancy. Even though the 76ers offense clearly runs through the Cameroonian big man, he doesn't have nearly as much responsibility in terms of playmaking. Simply put, Embiid currently has more playmakers around him that can help take the load off, like Simmons, Harris, Curry and Milton. Jokic, however, even when Murray was healthy, is the team's number one option in nearly every department. His playmaking is a pivotal part to his game, and it's what's led to the Nuggets' immense success in recent years. His passing ability and court vision weaponizes everyone on the floor. In fact, Jokic's playmaking ability is so rare to find that the last time a center averaged more than 8 assists per game was Wilt Chamberlain in 1968. So, pretty good company, I'd say. Shooting. The modern NBA heavily revolves around the three-point shot, so much so that now even centers are seemingly required to knock down treys. Part of what makes this comparison so difficult is the fact that both Embiid and Jokic can bang threes with relative regularity. The truth of the matter is that not many big men command the respect of opposing defenses the same way that Joel Embiid does. He's third in the NBA in scoring. he displays a tremendously polished post game with more than respectable facing up against an opponent. To put it simply, Joel Embiid is a bruiser on the interior, utilising his tremendous strength and powerful frame to take advantage of his defender with immense efficiency. Part of what makes Embiid so dangerous is the fact that he's extremely efficient from all over the court, shooting remarkable percentages from all levels on offense, 52, 38, 86. Even though Jokic is averaging fewer points per game in fewer games played, he still stands as one of the more efficient scorers, even while playing more than 4 more minutes per game than Embiid. However, because Jokic is less athletic than Embiid, he has to work a lot harder for his points and is generally forced to get a little more creative. You'll find that Jokic is craftier and patient when looking for his shot, making you feel like he can score wherever and whenever he wants. His footwork is also exceptional given his massive frame, especially in the post, where he's able to utilize his strength to create space and score using a variety of fadeaways. As a result, he's only averaging 3.5 fewer points per game than Embiid, but on better shooting percentages, 57, 40, 86, including an effective field goal percentage of 60.6% and a true shooting percentage of 64.8%, compared to Embiid's 55% effective field goal percentage and 64% true shooting percentage. So when it comes down to shooting, it's a bit of a toss-up between these two NBA bigs. If you're looking for a more efficient shooter that can consistently hit from all over the court, then Jokic is going to be your man. But if you're in need of a bruiser who carries more athleticism to battle in the post, then you go with Embiid. Jokic's game is largely based on getting the ball from outside and working with what he has, whereas Embiid prefers to dominate in the mid-range and body his way into the paint, so it'll depend heavily on the players you surround these two with. Overall, we believe the better shooter to be Nikola Jokic. Defense. If you're hoping to build a team around a superstar center, then you're going to need to grab one that can defend fearlessly against any opponent. Simply put, your star player can't just be an offensive scoring threat with no defensive game. The greatest players of all time did it on both ends of the court. Wilt, Kareem, Ewing, Shaq, they were all just as feared for their defense as well as their offense. When it comes to comparing Jokic and Embiid and their defensive games, we don't have to look far to see who the obvious winner is. It's Joel Embiid. While it may seem like a no-brainer, the matchup is actually far closer than you'll think. As expected, the far stronger and more athletic Embiid has had a remarkably better defensive campaign than Jokic. In nearly half of his minutes matched up against other centers in the league, Embiid is holding opponents to under 40% from the field and 44% for opposing forwards, whereas Jokic allows over 50% of opponents' shots when he's the sole defender for both centers and forwards. Even with this being the case, the advanced stats have vastly favoured Jokic over the course of the two players' careers. The Joker leads the process in both defensive win shares and defensive box plus-minus in their 5 and 6 years since entering the league. However, Embiid's defensive efforts quite clearly contribute more to winning. He has the 9th best defensive win share in the league, tied with reigning Defensive Player of the Year Giannis Antetokounmpo and runner-up and teammate Ben Simmons. In fact, Embiid's impact defensively can be seen by the team's top-ranked defense compared to a Denver squad that's near the bottom of the NBA in defensive rating. With all that being said, Embiid is clearly the more effective defender. Jokic's high basketball IQ and court awareness helped to make him an above-average defender. However, his athleticism, or lack of, will always limit Jokic on the defensive end, especially in those one-on-one scenarios. It's been those attributes alone that have contributed to Embiid making back-to-back NBA All-Defensive teams. Athleticism and longevity. While there's no question that Joel Embiid is more athletic than Nikola Jokic, this, as well as his track record, are what put him at greater risk of injury down the line. Embiid's always struggled with injuries. Even before getting drafted in 2014, he underwent surgery for a broken bone in his right foot. An injury that would end up ruling him out for the next 4 to 6 months, effectively costing him his entire rookie year. And then, in August 2015, Embiid had to undergo another surgery, leaving him sidelined for yet another NBA season, meaning he didn't even make his NBA breakthrough until 2 years after he got drafted because of injuries. And then again in 2017, he suffered a torn meniscus, forcing him to miss the remainder of the season. Even in 2021, Embiid was ahead of the pack for the majority of the year before being sidelined for nearly a month in March following a bone bruise in his left knee. To say Joel Embiid is injury-prone would be the understatement of the year. Jokic, on the other hand, has never struggled with injuries, having played no less than 73 games a season since entering the league, even as the team's #1 option. Over the past 4 seasons, Nikola Jokic has averaged over 32 minutes a game and missed less than 20 games combined. They both stand at almost the exact same height and weight. Joel is 7 foot and 280 pounds. Jokic is 6 foot 11 and 284 pounds, and they more or less play the same amount of minutes. So then why is it that Embiid has missed far more games than Jokic? Well, this is because Joel Embiid's style of play puts him at a much greater risk of injury. At the end of the day, Joel Embiid doesn't play particularly recklessly. However, he does play above the rim more often and is far more physical than Jokic. As previously mentioned, Nikola Jokic is the sort of player who prefers to play on the exterior, slow the game down, and take the time to think about the right course of action, whereas Embiid's more likely to run the floor, make quick adjustments, attempt to beat his opponent off the dribble, and body him in the paint on his way to a quick 2. All of that sounds like a recipe for disaster. Back when big men ruled over the NBA, this style of play was tremendously effective. Unfortunately, nowadays you're simply just putting your body in harm's way by playing this aggressively, especially if you've already got a lengthy history with injuries. Bully ball is fun to watch and an admirable trait to have in a 7-footer, but you then notice how one of these players has played almost twice as many games as the other, and they're both drafted in the same year. Even in this season, Embiid has played incredibly, but only for 49 games. Jokic, he's played 68. Aside from the hardware that these games missed are likely to cost Embiid, this also raises some concern for future longevity. If a player carries this much weight and this many previous injuries, how long will it be before he suffers a more devastating, potentially career-ending injury? Or even if it's not career-ending, how many more injuries will Embiid be able to sustain before we start to see a serious decline in his talent? Indeed, right now, Joel Embiid is a spectacular player that can absolutely lead a championship-contending team to success. But for how long? When it comes to longevity, I'd rather put my faith in a player who, though plays at the same weight, has yet to suffer any major injuries. Knocking on wood. Verdict: Nikola Jokic. All in all, deciding which of these players is better will depend heavily on the team in discussion. For example, part of the reason why Embiid works in Philadelphia is because he has playmakers all around him and therefore isn't relied on for this aspect of the game and can instead focus on mismatches in the paint or beating slower big men off the dribble. Whereas Jokic masterfully leads Denver in nearly all categories as the team's primary ball handler, passer, scorer, rebounder and leader in the locker room. But if you were to reverse this and put these two on opposite teams, it's likely to not work nearly as well. So depending on the type of team, one player will be better than the other. If your team carries a lot of shooters but lacks in playmaking, then maybe you'd go with Jokic. But if you're in dire need of a better post player and defense, then you go with Embiid. However, after breaking down each player's game individually, we believe that the better player overall is Nikola Jokic. At the end of the day, both of these players are tremendously gifted on both ends of the floor and show true passion for the game night in and night out. But Jokic not only gives your team a better chance to win now, but is also a better piece to build around in the future. P.S. I think he's going to win the MVP too.